Welcome to We Mean Business. I'm Steve Dorfman. Today we're going to talk about the #1 Amazon bestseller, Same-Side Selling, a radical approach to break through sales barriers. And we're with the co-authors, Jack Quarles and Ian Altman. Jack Quarles is the #1 Amazon bestseller of How Smart Companies Save Money, and Ian Altman is the #1 Amazon bestseller of Upside Down Selling. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us here, Steve.
So, Ian, there are lots of books on procurement, way more books on selling. As I understand it, this is the first time that those two notions have come together in one book. Isn't that true? And how did that come to be?
Yeah, to our knowledge, that's it. And in fact, that's part of the reason that compelled us to write this book is Jack and I, in our discussions, we met, and you would think that there would be this instant adversarial positioning between us because Jack's been on the procurement side, I've been on the sales side, and Jack's last name is Quarles. So you would expect there would be some bickering involved. But actually, we saw things very much eye to eye and saw those adversarial traps that pit buyer against seller and realized that there was no one ever talking about sales from the buyer's perspective. And there were a whole bunch of preconceived notions that I had and that I was certain were absolutely true about sales that Jack convinced me weren't accurate, and together we figured out the ways that take those adversarial tensions and put the buyer and seller on the same side of the table.
All right, so Jack, speaking of adversarial tensions, you spent years in procurement. What were some of the big, just like glaring mistakes that salespeople were making?
So often the salesperson comes in and you feel like you're playing a game with them. And they make an offer, they make a bid, and then you're talking about where the value is. They assume that you just want, as the buyer, to get the price as low as possible. And what I found when I worked with my more sophisticated clients, people that really saw the big picture, it wasn't all about price. Yet that's so often the the seller's mindset. And then they come in, and one of the things that Ian and I talked about a lot, and here he picks on my name, so to kind of rub it in. But both the buyer and the seller sort of came into a purchase feeling like it was going to be this battle, and that it had to be, well, if you win, then I'm going to lose. What we explore in same-side selling is that really doesn't have to be the case. And in fact, when that's not the case, and when the buyer and the seller can take an attitude of, okay, how does this fit together, both sides end up getting a lot more out of it.
So in essence, you're saying it was a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy because salespeople were expecting, right, this sort of adversarial relationship or that it was all about price, when in fact it might not necessarily be. Right?
That's a good way to put it, and I think that's very true on the buyer side too. So as somebody who's worked with buyers for a couple of decades, the buyer often comes into it feeling like, well, these salespeople, you can't trust them. They're trying to, beat me. They're trying to sort of play this game. But that's usually not the case.
And keep in mind, Steve, one of the interesting things that I find often is that price matters most when the person doing the selling believes that price matters most. And oftentimes, it's the seller who creates this dynamic of the conversation being all about price. So it's very common they would go to a buyer like Jack and say, hey, I've got this thing that we're selling. I know you guys are currently buying it. How much are you guys paying for it now? And Jack says, well, we're paying $100,000 for it. And the seller says, well, I might be able to save you some money, which wasn't necessarily Jack's primary motivation, but now Jack's thinking, wow, maybe I can save some money.
Right.
And then the seller says, man, I can't believe this buyer is just interested in price. Well, it's usually because the seller did something that caused that to happen.
Yeah. Jack, what could salespeople have been doing to earn your trust and earn it quickly?
One of the first things that a salesperson can do, and this is almost a magical sentence, and we talk about this in the book, but this posture that if I'm selling, what's your reaction when you walk into a store on Saturday morning, your favorite big box store, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of your eye, you see, fastly approaching somebody in a clean shirt, and they say, may I help you? Mm-hmm. And most of us feel like, no, get away, right? Because we don't want to be sold to.
Yeah.
And when somebody comes with that posture, we feel like we're going to be manipulated. And instantly our defenses go up.
Yeah.
Now, when you're able to establish yourself as a salesperson, as somebody who is trying to solve a problem rather than just sell, then that changes everything. And the quickest single way to do that is by quickly establishing that you may not have the solution to what the buyer wants. So to qualify the buyer and to say, well, look, I don't know if you really are going to be in a position to buy this. That has such a disarming effect on the person who's buying and can really set the tone for a very collaborative, cooperative conversation after that.
Yeah, and I would imagine that requires really thoughtful, powerful questions, right?
Yeah.
To position yourself that way. So what's an example?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we talk about in the book is this idea of fit or finding impact together. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of salespeople, they think their job is to come in and convince the client that they need whatever it is that they're selling as a salesperson. The reality is that more than half the people you meet who on paper seem like they might be a good fit probably aren't a good fit for you, where business is never going to happen, or at least not in the near future. So you start asking questions that get beyond just the initial issue or the high-level concept that someone's talking about, but instead we start talking about more the impact of their business. So we'll ask questions like, well, what happens if you don't solve this? What would happen a year from now if we did solve it? What would things look like differently in the business? And now you're focusing on what happens if they don't solve it and the outcome later, which means now you're talking about the result to their business or their life, not whatever it is that you're selling.
That's really good, and it handles my next question: like, how do you demonstrate your honorable intentions? And that's just how to do it. Jack, how long should a salesperson allow to build the rapport and trustworthiness? I mean, I feel like so many salespeople they go into that initial meeting thinking, well, I've got to earn their trust, and I want to close the sale in one meeting. Well, that's probably not likely to happen in the first meeting, and it's probably not even going to happen in the first couple of meetings in some industries, right? So how can they best allow to build that rapport and that trustworthiness?
Well, the old mantra in sales was ABC, always be closing, mm-hmm. right? And that was famously portrayed in Glengarry Glen Ross, but it's been out in the sales circle since the 1950s, I think. We found an early reference to that. And the idea is, well, if you're having a conversation with somebody and building rapport, that's still sort of with an eye toward the next step, right? The next step is to get the demo, the next step is to make the sale. But again, what we talk about in the book is really focusing on the problem. Now, I think rapport, as a buyer, I feel like building rapport is greatly overrated. And when somebody comes in and they want to establish a friendship, I sort of feel like, well, what is this for? We're either working on a problem we can solve together. We're not really looking for friends here. Right? We both have friends in different places.
I mean, if Jack wanted a friend, he'd get a puppy.
That's right. And when salespeople try to be friends, often it's seen as not genuine or even manipulative. Mm-hmm. But again, when it comes down to figuring out, well, do you have the problem that I can help you solve? As a salesperson. Mm-hmm. Are you sure you have that? And is it really a problem that's important to you and a problem worth solving and worth paying for? Mm-hmm. I think that's the quickest way to build trust, is to focus on that problem and to say, I'm a guy as a salesperson who can solve a few problems. I don't know if you have it or not. Let's have a conversation. Let me ask some questions to see if you may have that problem that I can solve.
This is really valuable, and a lot of salespeople need to hear this. But I'm also wondering, are most people in procurement, do they sort of have the same behavioral profile that you have? Because, like you said, look, I'm not looking to make friends here, but if you can help me solve a problem, then we might have something. Do you feel that most people on that side of it are wired the same way, hardwired the same way?
We focus on selling in the book, and it's really written to salespeople. But the truth is there's a lot of fault on the procurement side as well. And buyers tend to, in large organizations, especially where there are procurement departments, buyers are very focused on looking at line items, looking at costs, and driving them down. And so a lot of times you do need to sort of back up. But as a seller, you can still speak to that, and you can influence that greatly to reframe the conversation to be talking about total value and not just price.
In fact, let me give you an example of that, Steve. One of the things that I ask people, I have the good fortune to speak at a lot of events, and I'll often ask people, okay, if you think of the buyer-seller interaction as a race, the starting block is the initial contact. And then I ask salespeople or executives, what's the finish line? And uniformly, what they tell me is, what's the sale, the close of the contract? But then if I ask them, what would your client say is the finish line? They would say, oh, well, the client would probably say, I guess the deliverables, the outcome, and I boil that down to the result. So the client's buying the result, and the salesperson thinks the finish line is the sale or the contract. But imagine if the salesperson, instead of focusing on the sale and getting the contract, what if the salesperson instead said, well, how do we know whether or not we're going to get the results? What could prevent us, separate from us even, what could prevent you as the client from achieving these results? Now all of a sudden it changes the conversation, and the client realizes you're as interested in the results as they are.
So I imagine that leads us to my next question for you was, you say that we should let buyers qualify themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really what I mean is we want the customer to convince us that they've got something that's worth solving. And I can't emphasize this enough. Why would we spend a waking moment trying to convince someone of our solution to something that they don't think is worth solving? And I jokingly say that if you are more passionate about selling something than the customer is about solving something, then bring your wallet because you're going to have to pay for it.
Mm-hmm. So, I have to wonder too, for anybody who's interested in reading this book, is this geared more for business to business or business to consumer, or is it a universal message that can apply to both? Jack?
Well, one thing I'd add for this, I'd say anybody in sales and anybody that feels like business development or sales should be part of their job would find this extremely freeing. Because what it really is completely integrity-based, and it means that you're working on sales as a part of, or from a foundation of solving somebody's problem. So often you feel like, well, in sales, again, we have to convince somebody that they have this problem. We have to convince somebody that we're the person to solve it, that we're qualified enough. When really it's much more about figuring out, well, do they have the problem? One quick story that we tell about in the book, I was representing a national association that was buying training services, and they had two final candidates, two final vendors, and they came in for the meeting. And one of the vendors was kind of homespun, and there was just really one person, and they did a pretty good job. And then the other vendor came in, and they started talking about all their national clients and these big box stores that everybody knew and other names that we knew. And they went on about a 12-minute introduction about their storied background, how qualified they were, and all the clients they'd served, and the results they'd gotten. It was very impressive, I thought. But when they walked out of the room, my client sat there and they said, well, with all those big-name clients, I don't know if they could give us enough attention. And they said, I feel like they might come in and feel like, well, whatever worked for those big retail places would work for us. So they were qualifying themselves. They weren't focused on qualifying the client and the problem, and it really worked to their disadvantage despite the great record that they'd had.
Yeah, so that said, how can somebody avoid that pitfall of looking like a one-size-fits-all approach? I mean, that's part of what you're saying here, is that you feared that they were just going to pull a solution off the shelf that fit these bigger groups and these bigger names, and it wasn't going to be tailored to you. So how can they get past? How can they not appear that way?
Let me throw out a suggestion, then we'll give Jack opportunity for rebuttal.
Jack Quarles.
Twice.
So one of the things is that there's a concept we talk about in the book called entice, disarm, and discover. And one of the ideas is to disarm the notion that you believe just because you've solved this for one organization that it applies to another. So, for example, if that same vendor had said to Jack's client, well, just because we've solved this for all these big box stores doesn't necessarily mean that that's the same way we would solve it for you. What probably would have happened is Jack's client would have said, well, if you solved it for them, of course it'll work for us. And then they would have been convincing Jack and his client Jack's client would have been convincing them instead of them trying to convince Jack. And so mostly it's having that humility to recognize that just because you've solved something for one client doesn't necessarily mean it applies to another one.
Well, listen, we've got to take a break, but I definitely want to talk about this entice, disarm, discover process that you talk about. I think it's really valuable. You're watching We Mean Business. I'm here with best-selling authors Jack Quarles and Ian Altman, and we're talking about their book, Same Side Selling. We'll be back in seconds.
Hey, Hard, what's this?
That's my resignation letter.
You're resigning.
Why? Because you're constantly ignoring me. You're half as active as you used to be, and you get stuff like this. You've been putting me under a lot of pressure lately. That's why I'm ready to quit.
I forgot. I'll do better. Please, don't quit on me.
Okay, but remember, it's not what you say. It's what you do.
Listen to your heart. Don't let it quit on you.
Let's go for a walk.
Uncontrolled high blood pressure could lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get yours to a healthy range before it's too late.
Welcome back to We Mean Business. I'm Steve Dorfman, and today we're talking about the book Same Side Selling. I'm here with the authors Jack Quarles and Ian Altman. And just before the break, Ian, you touched on this entice, disarm, discover thing, and it's one of a couple of these processes that you cover in the book that I think is just really valuable. Walk us through a little bit.
So the idea of entice, disarm, discover is that you want to entice your client or potential client's interest by sharing concepts or problems that you solve with amazing results. You then disarm the notion that you're just there to sell something by having the humility and candor to say that what you do isn't a fit for everybody. And then you trigger a discovery phase to learn more about their situation. So, for example, if someone was a technology company, let's say an IT services company, and they specialize in working, let's say, with law firms, instead of saying that to someone, oh, we're an IT outsource company, in which case the client, their eyes roll back in their head, they slip into a coma and it's over. Instead, they might say, our clients come to us when their IT systems have been down too often. They're losing billable hours. They're not even sure if their IT professionals in-house know what they're doing, because after all, they're attorneys inside running the firm. They don't know how to manage these IT people. And for the right organizations, right law firms who are facing that, we deliver amazing results. But sadly, we find that we have a good fit for only about half the firms who are facing that. But if solving that's important to you, then we're happy to learn more about your situation to see whether or not we can help. And what it does is it immediately positions what you're good at solving and then says, but you may not be a fit for me. And this isn't some Jedi mind trick. When I talk to companies and I say, what percentage of the people that you meet who on paper seem like a good fit actually end up being a good fit? The number is always way less than half.
Okay, so that's the disarm part, where you're giving somebody an out. You know, oh, this isn't going to be a hard sell. I might not be a fit. And also they might jump into the mode of, well, I want to be in that half that you can solve problems for.
Exactly.
Right? And let them sell you on why that should work. Jackie, you were going to say something?
Yeah, just to follow up on that very point. I think it's, as salespeople, and I do some sales too, and you tend to think, well, you're proud of what you have, and you're positive, and you say, well, I can help almost anybody. But again, to follow what Ian said, if you really think it through, all the clients that even look good on paper for you, how many of them are really in a position where they know they have the problem, they're set up organizationally to really take advantage of what you do and to deliver high impact? And it's worth thinking that through and getting that in your gut, because again, it's not a Jedi mind trick and it's not reverse psychology. It needs to be based on reality. But when a salesperson can walk in and incredibly say and authentically say, look, chances are we probably can't help you right now. What that does is it pivots things so dramatically and it puts you in that trusted advisor role. And so many of us in sales are trying to get to the trusted advisor role, right? We say, we don't want to just be somebody who sells something. I want to be a trusted advisor. The best way to become a trusted advisor is to be able to authentically say, I don't have the solution. Let me help you find it somewhere else. But that leads to so much more business, even with that client, but also down the road.
Wow. So, Ian, you always talk about this mindset shift of, don't talk about what you do, talk about the problems that you solve.
Yep.
So is that the entice part? Is it these are the reasons clients come to us?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, because the thing is, people don't necessarily know why they need somebody's help. So I've done a lot of research on how executives and how individuals make decisions when it's like big purchase items. And what it comes down to is the first question they ask is, why do I need it, or what problem does this solve for me? The second question is, what's the likely results or outcome? And the distant third is, why you? Meaning, what are my alternatives? Well, if we don't initially start with why somebody might need what we do, or what problems or challenges we solve for them, then that's when you start getting questions from clients, questions like, so when would someone actually use something like this? Meaning, you pique their interest, but they're not quite sure why they need it or what problem it solves. And you think, wow, but what we have is so cool. Yeah, it's so cool as long as someone has that need. So getting back to this idea of finding impact together or fit, you're asking the right questions, and we cover a lot of dialogue in the book. We're asking the right questions to uncover whether or not someone has a need that warrants your solution. Instead of, I get this great thing, and I know if I talk about it long enough, you'll be convinced that that's true. It isn't the case. Effective sales is about getting to the truth as quickly as possible. It's not about persuasion or coercion.
So, Jack, Ian just touched on, that a part of this is why you, right? So that has to do with trust, fundamentally. And so how can a salesperson know? Is there some sort of signal that they can pick up on to know that they've crossed through that trust threshold?
I think there probably are a lot of those little signals that the veteran salespeople sort of start to recognize over time. But again, if you can get, to take our metaphor literally, if you can get on the same side of the table, looking at a problem together, right? So we're not looking at each other and sizing each other up, but we're looking at some problem together and saying, hey, what is this problem? What's the solution? And might we be able to help you? I think that makes your chances go very high in terms of getting in that trusted position.
So if you think about it, Steve, if what I'm trying to do is build enough trust that you'll agree to sign my contract, then I'm playing the wrong game. If instead, together, we're trying to figure out how we're going to ensure that we're going to deliver results together, right? So I can say together every other word, right? But it's basically the idea is how together we're going to deliver these results. Then all of a sudden the conversation becomes less adversarial, and now together we're trying to figure it out. So a high-level, same-side selling professional would ask a question like, look, what are the things that might come up that would inhibit us from delivering the results that you and I agreed were important? And now the seller and the buyer are working together to figure out all the roadblocks that would inhibit the results. And once the client is in agreement that, yeah, you know what, there are no major roadblocks, and I'm confident we're going to get the results, the great closing line becomes, would you like our help? And now it's all integrity-based, it's very comfortable, and it allows for people who are typically service professionals to be comfortable with the notion of selling.
So FIT stands for Find Impact Together, and you mentioned that word together. And as somebody who works in procurement, I imagine that's going to have them feel, Jack, that this guy's going to make me look good in front of my boss.
Absolutely, and that's the name of the game, of course. And it's a matter of delivering value long term, not just the lowest cost at first.
So, Jack, how many times, when you were in procurement, how many times out of 10 did you feel that somebody was on the same side?
I would say that would be less than one. I'm sorry to say. And in terms of the initial tone,
all right, how many times out of 100?
Yeah. More than one. No, I can think of a lot of outstanding vendors, salespeople, that really came in and had the perspective of trying to solve a problem. And then out of that subset, probably is a smaller group that was willing to say, hey, we might not have the right solution. But when that happened, it just leaves you with a buyer saying, boy, how can we work with these guys? Maybe it's not now, maybe it's not this project, but this is the kind of vendor we want to have, because we want to have that relationship where somebody can tell me the truth, we totally respect them, they know when they don't have the right answer, but they help get us the results that we're really looking for.
Yeah, and I would imagine, Ian, that makes somebody so much more referable, even if they aren't a fit this time, right now.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, it makes us that salesperson as someone who you call up with any sort of question. Because if they have that candor of saying, you know what, Steve, in this particular situation, I'm not the best fit, but I know who is, and you guide the client to that solution, it's a tough thing for an entrepreneur or a business person to do. But once you do that, you've built this amazing trust with that client that says, you know what, this person actually has a mutual interest in our results, even if it's at their own expense. And that's someone you want to do business with for a long time.
Jack, I wanted to ask you, what pitfalls should salespeople avoid when it comes to this diagnostic process? I know you both write about this diagnostic process, and you can sort of put yourself into a trick box by using it, and some salespeople end up doing that. A lot of salespeople end up doing that, right? So how can they avoid those pitfalls? And actually, start by talking about what the diagnostic process is.
Well, in terms of understanding what the client is actually facing and what the challenges are and whether they're a good fit, one of the key things we talk about is do they have the problem, and then do they recognize that problem is at a level of importance. If you were to rank it between a 1 and 10, is it an 8, 9, or a 10? Because where we get really frustrated as salespeople, where the sales cycles take forever, where they're not getting back to us, or it just seems there's low energy, that probably indicates that it's really not a pressing problem for the client. Maybe they fit the profile and they have something that you can solve, but maybe they don't really see it as something that's really costing them money or costing them pain. And so it's not that level of urgency.
There's two main traps that I see salespeople fall into. And they're both kind of entertaining when you look at it from the outside. The first one is the eternal optimism. So this eternal optimism that every client's a good fit for them. So this whole idea of us talking about fit, well, never mind that thing, because everybody needs my stuff. They just don't know it yet. So there's the one side that people run into. The other side is the notion that, well, man, if I just have one more meeting, if I share just a little more information, then that client's going to realize that they need my stuff. So they kind of feel like they have to keep convincing the client instead of stepping back and saying, look, we've been talking about this for a while. I get the sense that solving this isn't that big of a deal. And if so, I don't want to take up more of your time. And that usually uncovers or unleashes the truth from the client that says, well, it is important, but first I have to solve this other issue. And now you're seen as an ally instead of someone who's a pest.
Yeah. Is that what they call the takeaway close?
Something like that.
So, you mentioned the convincing part. Now, I feel like you've seen my questions because you keep touching on what's next. So the convincing part, that's the mindset that a lot of salespeople just default to. And sometimes I think they don't even realize that they're doing it. It's just their go-to mindset. So how can somebody who's got that go-to mindset of just I have to convince you because and it might just be coming from a good place, right? That I just believe so much that what I'm able to provide you in a solution is exactly what you need, and I've got to convince you of that. So how can they go from that mindset to what you talk about in solving problems? So from convincing to solving, how can they make that shift?
Well, keep in mind, you might have a great solution if somebody has a condition that warrants that solution. And so if as a salesperson you take the perspective of my first requirement is to see if someone has a need that's worth solving, then all of a sudden what it means is you take your solution and you put it on the back burner. And you say, I'm not ready to bring my solution out to show it to anybody yet until they convince me that they might have a need for that. And that changes the dynamic considerably. And it's a tough thing to do because the number one question I get from salespeople, executives, entrepreneurs is, so what if I go out there and there's not a fit? Then what do I do? And the answer is, you say, hey, thanks, it sounds like there's not a fit right now. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
And you can share third-party stories. Here's what other people found important. How about you? And if the client says, yeah, not so much, then you're done. You've just saved yourself and them a bunch of time.
Mm-hmm. Steve, there's an old Far Side comic where it's what we say to dogs and what dogs hear. And do you remember that? And in the first frame, it's a guy talking to his dog and says, Ginger, you've been a bad girl, Ginger. Don't you ever go in that trash again, Ginger. You know, if you do that again, Ginger, I'm going to put you outside. Okay, then the next frame, it shows what the dog's actually hearing. And the dog hears, blah, 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 Ginger, blah, 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 Ginger, blah, 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 Ginger. Right? All they hear is their name.
Right.
Now, it's kind of like that when a salesperson is talking to a prospect. All the client really hears is their problem. That's the only way to get through to them, right? Everything else just fades. And so as salespeople, we're so excited about our technology, our solution, our qualifications, our past results, but all that is irrelevant unless it connects to the problem that the person has and how to solve it.
I hope that's in the book, by the way. That's great.
We should totally add that. Yes, it's in there.
Jack, when is it a good idea to bring up budget? Because this is like that, that ground that nobody wants to go to or everybody wants to go to, however they're wired. But it can become a pitfall. So
the quick answer from the buying side, then I'm going to let Ian answer from the selling side. But the quick answer from the buying side is, sure, everybody's got a budget on paper, but it's really all about long-term value.
Yeah, budget is the most highly overrated piece of information that salespeople are taught to pursue. Because if you find out what the issue is and how that issue is impacting that individual or business and why that's important enough for them to solve it, they'll find the money. But if you're just focused on the budget, it's almost like if the client gave you a budget that was half what it should cost, somehow you're going to do the solution for less. It just doesn't work that way.
All right, in 30 seconds or less, you talk about being unique. There's a whole chapter on being unique, right? So how can a salesperson be unique? 15 seconds from each of you.
Drill down and qualify yourself not just on what you sell, but on the demographic and the attitude of the client that you can solve. So instead of saying, well, I'm an IT provider for law firms, say, well, I focus on international law firms based in Cleveland that are facing this sort of problem. So get more specific on the problem you solve so you can own your hill instead of sharing somebody else's mountain.
Excellent.
Yeah, and as part of that, it's really just describing, once again, why those people would need your help. So I focus on these types of law firms in this area who are facing these sorts of challenges, and you're going to pique someone's interest who's experiencing that. And the beauty is you're going to repel the people who don't have that need.
That's right.
So you're going to waste less time chasing bad opportunities.
Excellent. Really good stuff, guys. So to learn more about same-side selling, please visit wemeanbiz.tv. Thank you, my guests here, Jack Quarles and Ian Altman, for an excellent interview. Look forward to seeing you next time.